At 35, I thought I knew everything about love and trust. Then one overheard conversation shattered every belief I held sacred about marriage, loyalty, and the woman I'd shared 8 years of my life with. What happened next taught me that sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the greatest gifts life can offer. I'm Michael, 35, and I never imagined I'd be sharing this story with strangers on the internet. But here I am, 6 months later, still processing what might be the most transformative experience of my adult life. If you've ever wondered how quickly everything you believe about your reality can crumble and rebuild itself into something stronger, buckle up. This journey taught me that the deepest wounds often carve space for the most profound healing. Last October, I was supposed to drive 3 hours north with my buddies to catch the playoff game we'd been planning to see for months. I'm a project manager at a mid-sized engineering firm, and between work deadlines and Catherine's demanding real estate schedule, these guys' weekends had become sacred to me. Catherine, my wife of 8 years, had been nothing but supportive, even suggesting I extend it to Sunday night since she'd planned a wine night with her girlfriends anyway. At 33, she'd built herself quite the reputation as one of the more successful agents in our suburban area, and her social circle had expanded along with her career success. But then Marcus called Friday afternoon. His youngest had come down with strep throat, and his wife Jessica needed him home. The whole trip fell apart within hours. I remember sitting in my Honda Civic in the company parking lot, debating whether to drive up alone or just accept the disappointment. Something about the idea of surprising Catherine won out. 8 years of marriage, and I still got excited about the prospect of unexpected time together. Looking back, that innocent decision to come home early became the moment that divided my life into before and after. I pulled into our driveway around 9:15 p.m., noting the familiar cars scattered along our quiet street. There was Ashley's blue Toyota Camry and Jennifer's silver Nissan Altima right where Catherine had said they'd be. The warm glow from our back patio told me the wine night was in full swing, and I could hear their laughter carrying through the crisp autumn air. For a moment, I considered walking straight through the front door and joining them, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the way their voices carried, or maybe it was just timing, but I found myself walking around the side of our modest two-story colonial instead of going inside. The sound of my name stopped me cold. Have you ever had one of those moments where your body knows something's wrong before your mind catches up? That's exactly what happened as I stood there by our garden gate, hidden in the shadows of our neighbor's oak tree. Catherine's voice was slightly slurred, the way it gets after her third glass of wine, but her words were crystal clear. Michael is just so. I mean, how has he not figured it out after all this time? The laughter that followed felt like ice water in my veins. Ashley's voice chimed in with something I'll never forget. Girl, you've been juggling David for what, 4 years now? He really has no clue. The explosion of laughter that followed was the sound of my world ending and beginning simultaneously. What came next was a masterclass in betrayal, delivered with the casual cruelty that only comes from people who believe they're completely safe from consequences. Catherine's voice grew more animated as she shared details that painted a picture I'd never seen. Last Tuesday, while Michael was working late on that Henderson project, David came over and we made love right on our living room couch. You know, the one where Michael takes his precious Sunday afternoon naps. The shriek of delighted laughter from her friends told me I wasn't mishearing anything. Jennifer's voice cut through the noise. The same couch where he probably told you he loved you the next morning. More laughter. Oh honey, Catherine replied. He made me breakfast in bed Wednesday morning. Those fancy eggs Benedict he learned to make for our anniversary. If he only knew what his devoted wife had been doing 12 hours earlier. The casual cruelty in her tone was something I'd never heard before, like she was discussing a mildly amusing television show rather than the destruction of our marriage. But it was what came next that truly broke something fundamental inside me. Ashley asked about my father's funeral 18 months ago, and Catherine's response revealed a level of deception that went beyond simple infidelity. Oh, that weekend was perfect, she said with genuine satisfaction. I told him I had food poisoning and couldn't handle being around people. Meanwhile, David and I spent 3 days at that bed and breakfast in Vermont. I even posted pictures on my private Instagram story, the one Michael doesn't follow. The laughter felt like physical blows. I stood there in our garden, surrounded by the roses I'd planted for our 5th anniversary, listening to my wife describe our marriage as her personal joke. She talked about how my business trips were her favorite opportunities to have David over, how she'd learned to time their encounters perfectly with my schedule, how she'd even used our joint checking account to book romantic getaways while I was traveling for work. Each revelation was another layer of my reality peeling away, showing me that the life I thought we'd built together was largely a performance for her benefit. The conversation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. I learned that David was a client she'd met 3 years ago when she helped him buy his downtown condo. I discovered that their relationship had evolved from professional to personal during what she'd told me were late-night client meetings. I found out that our friends had known for months, possibly years, and had been helping her maintain the deception. Most devastating of all, I realized that every milestone moment of the past few years had been shadowed by her double life. When I finally found the strength to move, I walked back to my car like a man in a dream. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. I drove to the 24-hour diner on Route 9, the one we used to go to after late movies when we were dating, and sat in a corner booth until my heart rate returned to something resembling normal. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was processing the end of my marriage in the same place where Catherine and I had once talked about our future together. That's when the real work began. Because what I realized sitting in that vinyl booth, staring at my reflection in the window, was that I had a choice. I could either let this betrayal destroy me, or I could let it teach me something profound about human nature, about resilience, and about the difference between reacting and responding. The woman who had just laughed about my stupidity had no idea that she'd actually given me the greatest gift possible: complete clarity about who she really was, and more importantly, who I was going to become. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Catherine was nursing her hangover with the kind of theatrical suffering she reserved for minor inconveniences, complaining about Ashley bringing that cheap wine and how Jennifer talks too loud when she drinks. I made coffee, kissed her forehead, and told her I hoped she felt better soon. The performance felt surreal, but it also felt strategic. For the first time in our relationship, I was operating with complete information while she remained blissfully unaware. Over the following days, I began what I privately called my investigation phase. When Catherine showered, I photographed her phone. When she worked late, I checked our financial statements. When she claimed to be showing houses on weekends, I verified her stories against publicly available real estate listings. What I discovered was a 3-year pattern of deception so comprehensive it was almost impressive. Hotel charges at the Hampton Inn 6 miles from our house. Restaurant bills for two at places I'd never been. Lingerie purchases from Victoria's Secret that I'd never seen her wear. But the digital evidence was the most damning. Text message conversations with David that read like a romance novel, complete with declarations of love and detailed discussions of their future together. Photos they'd taken during their secret getaways, including several at the Vermont Bed and Breakfast during my father's funeral weekend. Calendar entries in her work phone showing client meetings with David that coincided exactly with the nights she'd told me she was working late or having dinner with girlfriends. The financial trail was equally revealing. Our joint account showed a pattern of cash withdrawals that corresponded with her dates with David. Credit card charges for gifts I'd never received. Even a charge for a couple's massage package during what she told me was a solo spa day for stress relief. The level of planning and deception required to maintain this double life for 3 years was staggering. I found myself almost admiring her organizational skills while simultaneously planning her complete social and financial downfall. What struck me most during this period was how normal everything appeared on the surface. Catherine continued her routine of morning kisses and evening check-ins. She still texted me cute messages during the day and still initiated physical intimacy with the same frequency as always. She still made plans for our future, discussing vacation ideas, and even bringing up the topic of starting a family. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How does someone compartmentalize betrayal so completely that they can discuss baby names with the spouse they're systematically deceiving? I began to understand that I was married to someone fundamentally different from who I'd believed her to be. The Catherine I thought I knew was empathetic, honest, and incapable of sustained deception. The real Catherine was strategic, manipulative, and had been conducting a 3-year psychological experiment with me as the unwitting subject. This realization was simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant our entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies. Liberating because it meant I didn't owe the real Catherine the same loyalty I'd felt toward the version of her I'd created in my mind. 2 weeks after my discovery, I was ready to act. I'd consulted with Patricia Williams, the most aggressive divorce attorney in our county according to every online review I could find. I'd opened a new checking account and transferred exactly half of our joint savings, which was not only legal but recommended given the circumstances. I'd secured a lease on a one-bedroom apartment across town and had begun slowly moving my most important possessions. Most importantly, I'd developed a strategy that would give Catherine exactly what she'd given me: complete surprise followed by total loss of control. The timing had to be perfect. Catherine had been planning her annual client appreciation event for months. It was the social and professional highlight of her year, a chance to network with past clients and attract new ones. She'd bought a new dress, had her hair and nails done, and had been talking about nothing else for weeks. It represented everything she valued: professional success, social status, and the admiration of her peers, which made it the perfect backdrop for her public humiliation. That Thursday morning, I followed our normal routine with Oscar-worthy performance skills. I made her favorite coffee, kissed her goodbye, and wished her luck with the event. She left the house looking confident and beautiful, completely unaware that by evening, every aspect of her carefully constructed life would be in ruins. At exactly 10 a.m., I sent a comprehensive email to David's wife Sarah, whom I'd tracked down through social media. The email included copies of text messages, photos from their getaways, and a detailed timeline of their affair. I also included my phone number and an invitation to call if she wanted to discuss the situation. Sarah called within 30 minutes. The conversation was one of the most difficult I've ever had, but also one of the most necessary. She'd suspected something for months, but had been told by David that she was being paranoid and jealous. She thanked me for giving her the truth she'd been seeking and told me she was going to confront David immediately. We agreed to stay in touch as we both navigated the legal implications of our spouse's betrayal. By noon, David was apparently in full panic mode. Sarah later told me he'd broken down completely when confronted with the evidence, admitting to everything and begging for forgiveness. But his confession included throwing Catherine completely under the bus, claiming she'd pursued him aggressively and that he'd tried to end things multiple times. Whether that was true or not, it meant Catherine's affair partner was now actively working against her interests to save his own marriage. At 2 p.m., I sent copies of all evidence to Catherine's parents. This was perhaps the most difficult decision I made during the entire process. Robert and Linda had always treated me like a son, and I genuinely cared about them. But I also knew that Catherine would try to control the narrative once the truth came out, and I wanted them to hear the facts directly from me. In my email, I explained that I respected them too much to let them be blindsided by their daughter's version of events. I told them I understood if they needed to support Catherine through this crisis, but I wanted them to know the complete truth about why our marriage was ending. Linda called me within an hour, sobbing. She said they had concerns about Catherine's behavior over the past year, but had dismissed them as normal marital stress. She apologized repeatedly and asked if there was any chance for reconciliation. I told her honestly that the person I thought I was married to never actually existed, and that I couldn't rebuild a relationship with someone who'd spent 3 years systematically deceiving me. Robert called later that evening to say they supported my decision and that they were ashamed of their daughter's actions. By 4 p.m., Catherine's client event was apparently falling apart. She'd been receiving calls and texts all afternoon and had finally left early to deal with what she assumed was a David-related crisis. She had no idea that the crisis was actually her entire life imploding in real time. I was sitting calmly in our living room when she burst through the front door at 5:30, her makeup ruined and her new dress wrinkled from what I assumed had been hours of stress and crying. The conversation that followed was everything I'd expected and nothing like I'd prepared for. She cycled through every stage of the cheater's playbook: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and a strange form of acceptance that involved trying to seduce me back into the relationship. She claimed David had pursued her relentlessly and that she'd been trying to end things for months. She insisted that her love for me was real and that the affair was just physical. She promised to do anything to save our marriage, including cutting off all contact with David and entering couples counseling. But what struck me most was her complete inability to understand why I was so calm. She kept asking why I wasn't screaming or throwing things or demanding details about her relationship with David. I think she expected a dramatic confrontation that would center her as the victim of my emotional reaction. Instead, I simply handed her the divorce papers I had prepared and told her I'd be staying elsewhere while she figured out her next steps. The look of complete shock on her face when she realized this wasn't an impulsive decision, but a carefully planned strategy was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. She tried everything that night: tears, seduction, threats, promises, and finally a kind of desperate honesty where she admitted that she'd taken me for granted and had convinced herself that what I didn't know couldn't hurt me. She said she'd never intended for things to go as far as they had with David, but that once they'd started, she'd felt trapped by her own lies. She claimed she'd been planning to end things after the first of the year, and that she'd only continued the affair because she was afraid of losing both relationships. None of it mattered. The woman who had laughed with her friends about how stupid I was had revealed her true character, and no amount of after-the-fact remorse could change that. More importantly, I discovered something about myself during those 2 weeks of preparation. I was capable of strategic thinking and emotional control under extreme pressure. The betrayal that was meant to destroy me had actually revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. The following months were a masterclass in consequences. Catherine's professional reputation suffered when several clients learned about her affair through our interconnected social network. Her friendship circle fragmented as people chose sides or simply distanced themselves from the drama. Her relationship with her parents became strained as they struggled to reconcile their disappointment with their love for their daughter. Most significantly, her financial situation became precarious when she realized she couldn't afford our lifestyle on her income alone. David's marriage didn't survive either, despite his attempts to paint Catherine as the predator. Sarah filed for divorce within a month, taking their 2 young children and half of his substantial assets. His social standing in our community, where reputation matters for business success, was permanently damaged. The last I heard, he'd moved to another state to start over. Catherine's grand romance, which had seemed so passionate and irresistible, evaporated the moment it was exposed to public scrutiny. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Catherine's attorney tried to argue that her affair was irrelevant to property division, but our state's laws regarding marital misconduct gave me significant leverage. The evidence I'd gathered was so comprehensive that there was no room for dispute about the facts. We settled out of court, with me keeping the majority of our assets and Catherine receiving enough to start over modestly. The judge actually commended me for the thoroughness of my documentation and the restraint I'd shown throughout the process. But the real transformation happened within me. The months following our separation taught me things about resilience, self-respect, and the difference between love and attachment that I never could have learned while married to someone who was systematically deceiving me. I discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more capable of independent happiness than I'd believed, and more deserving of genuine partnership than I'd previously required of my relationships. I also learned the profound difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I was able to forgive Catherine for her betrayal because holding on to anger was damaging me more than her. But forgiveness didn't require me to trust her again or to pretend that our relationship could survive such fundamental dishonesty. I could wish her well in her future while also maintaining clear boundaries about what role, if any, she would play in mine. 6 months later, I ran into Catherine at the grocery store near our old neighborhood. She looked different somehow, smaller and less confident than the woman who'd once commanded every room she entered. We had a brief, polite conversation during which she apologized again and told me she was in therapy trying to understand her behavior. She said she hoped I was doing well and that she was sorry for the pain she'd caused. I told her I appreciated her apology and that I hoped she found the happiness she'd been seeking. What struck me about that encounter was how little I felt. No anger, no sadness, no longing for what we'd lost. Just a kind of neutral recognition that we were two people who had once shared a life and now didn't. The woman who had once been the center of my emotional universe was now simply someone I used to know. The transformation was complete. The betrayal that was meant to destroy me had actually freed me to become someone I never could have been while living in her web of deceptions. Today, I'm living in a downtown apartment I actually love, working on a promotion that will advance my career significantly, and dating someone who values honesty as much as I do. I'm not rushing into anything serious, but I'm open to the possibility of real partnership built on genuine transparency and mutual respect. The experience with Catherine taught me what I won't accept in a relationship, but more importantly, it taught me what I deserve. The friends who knew about Catherine's affair and said nothing have been quietly excluded from my social circle. The ones who reached out to check on me during the divorce have become closer than ever. I've learned to value loyalty and integrity over social convenience, and my relationships are stronger as a result. I've also become someone other people come to for advice when they're facing difficult decisions, which tells me that the strength I discovered during my darkest period is apparent to others. Looking back, I realize that overhearing Catherine's conversation that night was the best thing that could have happened to me. Not because betrayal is ever good, but because living a lie is always worse than facing a difficult truth. The woman who laughed about how stupid I was gave me the gift of clarity about who she really was and who I was capable of becoming. The marriage that ended in devastating betrayal became the foundation for a life built on authentic self-knowledge and genuine self-respect. If you're reading this and recognizing elements of your own situation, I want you to know that survival is possible, that growth is inevitable, and that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you do for yourself. The person who betrays your trust is telling you exactly who they are. The question isn't whether you can forgive them or fix the relationship. The question is whether you're brave enough to believe them and strong enough to choose yourself. 3 decades of life experience taught me that love without respect is just attachment, that loyalty without honesty is just convenience, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. The woman who destroyed our marriage taught me what real love looks like by showing me everything it's not. And for that painful gift, I'll always be grateful. Overheard wife laughing with friends about her 3-year affair, calling me too stupid to realize what was happening. Instead of confronting her immediately, I spent 2 weeks gathering evidence and preparing a comprehensive divorce strategy. Exposed the affair on the day of her biggest professional event, watched her entire life collapse in real time, and discovered that the betrayal meant to destroy me actually revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. 6 months later, living my best life while she deals with the consequences of her choices. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you do for yourself.